Assalamu alaikum. Actually, ഞാൻ എൻ്റെ പേപ്പറിൻ്റെ പേരൊന്ന് മാറ്റിയിരുന്നു. Name of my paper is Legality as a Paradigm of Discourse in the Self-Making of a Muslim Woman. പേപ്പർ ഞാൻ ഇംഗ്ലീഷിലാണ് എഴുതിയിരിക്കുന്നത്. മലയാളം കൂടി ആഡ് ചെയ്യാൻ ശ്രമിക്കാം. So in this paper, I am attempting to critically look at the specific pattern of identity formation of the category Muslim woman, and instead of considering the category as an ontologically stable or pure category outside of any socio-cultural effects in a pre-discursive space, I would rather like to look at it as a category that is constructed in the discursive space of legality. So if we take a look at many of the debates that happened in the Indian public sphere regarding the Muslim woman, including the triple talaq issue and other issues like the raise of minimum age for marriage, the lift of ban of entry of women into dargah, the CBSE hijab control issue, etc., easily reveal that they are heavily loaded with the modern political language of basic rights, freedom, autonomy, agency, and equality, etc. It will suggest the huge extent to which the category of the Muslim woman finds subject formation through a rights discourse which is inscribed in a largely modern secular paradigm. അതായത് Muslim woman ഉള്ള category, the subject formation is hinged upon how much she partakes in the rights discourse. Rights discourseലൂടെയാണ് Muslim women self-making possible ആവുന്നത്. It always comes under a rubric of secular interpretation that always works in tandem with statist logic. The language of such debates about her is one that affirms the idea of a modern political language of equality and gender justice. My contention is that political by definition, this conception of Muslim woman extremely limits the aspirations and sensibilities of religious subjectivity that is important to many Muslim women. So here legality for the purpose of this paper assumes a concept which denotes a tradition of discourse connected to constitution, rights, and nation state at large. As Agamben has pointed out, legality is a mode of power and is based on defining a citizen or people by a violent exclusion of vulnerable others. So legality works as a concept carrying with it a concomitant vocabulary of the nation-state discourse and acts as a mode of operation in exclusion and violence of the other. In the public sphere, through the mainstream newspapers, TV debates, social media discussions on Sharia controversies, the voice of a Muslim woman who does not engage in the same legal discourse of rights is not seen valid enough vis-a-vis the one who talks about her rights. The former is seen as the oppressed other in the entire discourse. Her voice becomes unbefitting for a modern era. With reference to the colonial Egyptian context, a scholar named Samira Ismair, introducing the idea of juridical humanity, examines the formation of the concept of human constructed out of practices and through operation of colonial legality of British Empire. She analyzes the creation of the new man by British colonial officials in Egypt through the introduction of the modern positive Western law. In her analysis, law produces human, thus the human becomes the subject or end of the secular law, and it acquires its humanity when inscribed in this universal law. What can be studied from the character of the debates played out in the public sphere about the welfare of the Muslim woman is that, as a category, it gets legitimized only through its discursive association with Indian legality. Legality in the Indian soil unfolds in a complex manner. It profoundly shares the tradition of Hindu hegemony, even as it borrows from colonial administration, and it has been a parameter of legitimizing certain utterances and subjecthood. The Sharia debates after the Shabana spectacle opened the Pandora's box on so many levels. One of the major instances in shaping and forming a new juridical Muslim subject, the new Muslim woman, that has been playing a pivotal role in the construction of gender involving the idea of agency. Agentiality was attributed in a new way in the Muslim woman subject for the first time and was made possible in the public discourse when she articulated herself as a right-bearing category, openly critical of the vices of her community. Arpita Elizabeth Varghese has written about how Sharia became an obstacle for many educated Muslim women those times in articulating their subjecthood and how a reform was becoming inevitable. I contend that this new subjectivity is an effect of modality of power operationalized through a set of secular legal codes that summon the Muslim woman into speaking the same legal language. So being under undue pressure from upper caste secular feminists in India who were taking on savior modes for scapegoats of Muslim patriarchy and who were toying with the idea of the liberated Indian woman, the progressive Muslim women soon had to quickly carve a similar modern space where they could stand and speak. This is evident in works done by scholars like Sabiha Hussain and Arpita Elizabeth Varghese, as I mentioned earlier, on the Muslim women's organizations in India. Arpita in her work locates Muslim women's agency in India in the organizations such as AEN and BMMA that, in her words, quote, fragment religious and state authorities, quote closed, and a pioneering change in the narrative hitherto limited to the plight of the Muslim woman. Agency here is configured as antagonistic to community and the consciousness of identity evoked as a reactionary force against the community leaders. Tracing the history of women's movements in India, Sabiha Hussain in her work travails on the public participation of Muslim women in the early 20th century British India, and it is located in an evidently feminist cosmology that foregrounds modern notions like autonomy and freedom, and in her constant reproduction of the binary of the modern right-bearing, thus agential Muslim woman versus the rigid community torch-bearers under whom supposedly no woman can assert her identity, and one sees the secular burden on the modern citizen to make possible any public utterance about the self only through a voice that keeps denying its ties to the community. The subject has to keep negating anything that reminds of traditional authority that would deter her what she deems as material progress. That is why Zakia Soman, co-founder of BMMA, spearheading the movement for the reform of Muslim personal law, on asked about hijab and its symbolic importance, has to progressively remark, quote, "Why wear your religion on your sleeve?" Quote closed. This is a classic example when attempts are consciously made to facilitate the emergence of the modern individual by dissociating herself from markers symbolic of a particular community. The self is then positioned in relation to the storylines that are articulated around a legal vocabulary of rights that is clean of any religious tinge. Her self-making is found within the contours schematized by the state and modernity. Her language is largely a Western constitutional vocabulary, for example, in her a constant demand for codification of law, which bears huge difference from Islamic textual tradition and its attendant discourse. Asifa Qureshi Landis has worked on Western constitutionalism versus Islamic constitutionalism. In her work, Islamic constitutionalism, not secular, not theocratic, and not impossible. She talks about the different connotations of what we now know today as religious law. So taking on from her work, we can see that Zakia Soman does not realize that the tangible reality of fiqh is not a single code of law, but rather a different doctrine of schools, each equally valid. In pre-modern Muslim systems, the application of fiqh was through this diversity. So So her discourse bears huge difference from the Islamic textual tradition in its attendant discourse, and this essential epistemological disparity in worldviews is too obvious to give a pass. M.S.S. Pandian has written about how the pressure exerted by the modern has forced the subordinate caste to hate themselves in the birth of every citizen. And the birth of every citizen accompanies with it a painful severance of ties with the community. He persuasively argues how, for the articulation of the nation and its attendant discourses, recognizing the presence of community is integral to deny the legitimacy of the same. So the new Muslim woman, as I was talking about earlier, is empowered only through her knowledge of rights, and the men of her community for whom such new feminist waves may be alien are automatically cast out of her modern universe of secular legality. She becomes the apple of the eye for the media and the mainstream public. That is why someone critiquing her experiences of sexual encounters in madrasa years, as some incidents happened recently. So such articulations become more palatable for the public. From community kondu maatrame oru Muslim woman oru modern citizen ആയി മാറാൻ കഴിയുള്ളൂ. So the question Dr. Asma Zehra, another member from Personal Law Board, asked is very pertinent. So she has asked as to why women who have given up on hijab and who are not practicing Muslims are given more recognition in the public than practicing Muslims. Like she talks about other burqa-clad women who are not as palatable as the others. So secularism that Zakia upholds reveals itself in civilizing aspects that has to penetrate traditionalist reading with modern enlightenment values for the Muslim woman to emerge in the imagined rational thinking public of the nation. Attempts are made to make religion more congruent with a certain modality of liberal political rule and transform religious subjectivity into a certain modular form. Sabah Mahmood critiques the programmatic efforts to reshape and transform Islam from within undertaken by the US State Department. She argues that they employ, that is moderate Muslims, some of whom took part in this program, that they employ a particular conception of secularism that underlies the current consensus that Islam needs to be reformed, all of which ultimately serves the far right. And also, if we look at some of the public remarks, public statements made by Zakia Soman, we can see how far removed the discourse that she is generating is from the Islamic textual tradition. So on once in an article named How Ulama Are Perpetuating Male Hegemony in the Name of Islam, she talks about I'll quote, "We are told that your views are okay, but we need to consult scholars. Obviously, in their opinion, a scholar is someone with grey hair and maybe a beard." She continues later in the same article, "This is gross ignorance to say the least, and in the ultimate analysis only strengthens the stranglehold of patriarchy." And she stops there. When it is commonplace for any practicing Muslim that ulama itself is a theological category in Islamic traditional knowledge, which is a specific group of scholars charged with a certain authority, the fact that Zakia and co are reducing it to a patriarchal entity and laughing at its role in the Islamic life world speaks volumes about the secular feminist cosmology the debate generated by them is located in. So the modes of their articulation suggest that the category of the Muslim woman in public discourse is fundamentally one that finds meaning in a legal or rights context than an ethical religious one. So a traditional devout Muslim woman who does not find it meaningful to participate in her subject formation through the secular legal discourse and public utterance about agency, equality, etc., are an eyesore to the progressives for whom she needs to be taught this modern language. An ethical religious subject, the constituent factors of the same are already placed outside the conception of agency and subjectivity of modern sense. And these factors, which are deeply enclosed with the larger question of modernity, used to make the analysis of Muslim women more complex. Now, I'll just talk about Paula Bacheta, who in her seminal work, Gender in the Hindu Nation, okay, I will just finish it. Paula Bacheta in her seminal work, Gender in the Hindu Nation, talks about the functionality of representation of Muslim women in RSS archival journals and its role in the public discourse, which is to evoke emotions in the common public and disempower Muslim males and highlight their unbridled sexuality for women. So she argues how gender was the major axis deployed by the RSS to use Muslim women to denigrate Muslim men. So this is all with special relation to Shah Bano debate, the whole Shah Bano spectacle, one can call it. So, okay, I'll just finish it. Only by name-calling efforts to preserve the communitarian identity as a communal or fundamentalist or yet to be secularized, etc., can the new Muslim woman emerge as one of sound agency in the public sphere. Public being a zone of producing gender as well as private sphere as a conceptual entity facilitates various forms of exercises of legitimacy through the discourse animated by legality. Hence, Muslim woman as a category gets legitimized in the public sphere only through its discursive association with Indian legality. The language of such debates about the Muslim woman is one that affirms the idea of modern political language of equality and gender justice. It limits terribly her ethical religious aspirations, and identity affirmation is made possible only in this modern legal vocabulary or grammar. Thank you.